Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Introduction to JMP for Students. You should notice that there's a poll asking a few questions. It'd be great if you could answer those and get a little bit of background of your experience in using JMP and also the level of knowledge you have about statistics. You'll know, as you're familiar with using Zoom, that there's a Q&A panel and a chat panel. If you could use the Q&A panel for your questions, it'll be a little bit easier for us to manage and answer. If you just wanted to make a general comment, maybe introducing yourself to the group or whatever, you could do something in the chat, but for questions, keep it to the Q&A. Now, with that, Ross Matusalem, one of our statistical scientists on the academic team, is going to be giving the webinar today. Let me just check in. Ross, are you there and ready to go?
Yep, Kevin, I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
I can. I'll turn it over to you and everybody. You'll have a great session today.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming to learn a little bit about JMP. Kevin, thanks for hosting. Everybody, as Kevin mentioned, please use the Q&A panel for questions throughout, and Kevin will be in there fielding your questions live, and then I'll pause a couple times to take some questions as we go along. But with that said, let's move on over to JMP and get started. So looking at our poll results, and the poll is still open. I appreciate people continuing to fill it out. It looks like we have people with a mix of levels of statistics expertise, even a couple advanced folks, but mostly none to novice. And it looks like the majority of people who filled out the poll have no JMP expertise whatsoever, and that's great. Today, the goal is to take student users of JMP, particularly students who are either using JMP in your a course right now or will be using it soon, and give you the knowledge you need to be able to use it effectively, essentially to save you some time and effort learning JMP, in real time while you're trying to do a class exercise or a homework assignment or a project. So by the end of this, I hope that you all feel comfortable taking some of the data that you have in your course and getting it into JMP, making some graphs, performing some analyses, and saving your results. So let's talk about JMP, this software that we're looking at right now. And before we get into any specifics, for those of you who might be seeing JMP for the very first time, I want to just boost your intuition for what JMP even is. Now, from the title of the webinar, you know that it is about statistics software. So let's actually just take a little look at some of the things that JMP can do in that domain here. We're going to be using this data set that you are looking at, and this is data from November 2022, so just a couple months ago, on the most popular channels on YouTube, where we have the ranking of the channel, where the ranking is based on the number of subscribers for that channel. So here we have the number of subscribers in the millions. And we can see that the most popular YouTube channel as of November 22 was a channel called T-Series, which has 234 million subscribers. In the category over here, we can see that it is a music-focused channel, and we can see some other things, like it was started back in 2006. The channel currently has about 18,500 videos that have been viewed collectively about 212 billion times. So these values here in video views are in millions as well. So JMP is all about interactive data exploration and visualization and analysis, all through a point-and-click interface. So let's just take a look at a couple examples to boost our intuitions here. So let's say that we actually wanted to see across the various categories of channels like music, education, entertainment, and so forth, which ones have the most subscribers out of this collection of popular channels. We might choose, especially if we're just getting started with statistics, to answer that question with a graph. So let's do that. Let's take a look at the different categories and their subscriber numbers. In fact, you can see we've already gotten a simple graph just from a couple clicks here. We can see that T-Series is the most subscribed channel, again, with about 234 million subscribers. And let's go ahead and maybe add some color to our graph. So we're coloring it now by the category, and maybe ask, instead of having all those points, to just have bars that represent the sum total number of subscribers. All right, so what do we see? Well, it looks like music and entertainment dominate this group of popular YouTube channels. In fact, we have, it looks like, over 5 billion total subscribers, about 5.2 billion subscribers in the music category. So JMP has a lot of interactive graphics. This is just one example of making a graph with JMP, and we're going to take a look at this particular tool in a little more detail shortly. But JMP also, while it's very graphically focused, also performs a wide variety of statistical analyses. So let's start with something simple. Let's say I actually just want the numbers, the numerical values behind this graph, so the actual sum total subscriber numbers for each category. So JMP has a tool that'll let us do that pretty easily. So let's say that we want to look at the different categories and the subscriber numbers. And here we have the sum total. So for that music category that we saw was the most subscribed, we can see that 5.2 billion subscribers. The next most was entertainment, and I can see that that's about 4.8 billion subscribers. One thing you might be noticing as I'm clicking around in this table is that when I select a particular category, it's getting selected in that graph on the right, and actually the individual channels in that category are getting selected back in our data table. Here's one more example. If I click on education, we can see that education bar is selected, and in our data table, all of the education channels are being selected. That's a core part of JMP and its interactivity, is that you can always just click directly on some of the data and have it selected everywhere, which makes JMP a pretty good tool for actually getting to know your data and navigating it and exploring it. So we've made a graph and done a basic numerical summary. JMP is also quite useful for a wide range of statistical analyses. So if you're just getting started in statistics, which I think a number of us here are, you might start with analyzing just single variables. And so here's an example of a statistical output where we're analyzing 4 of our variables here. So the subscriber number, video views, video count, and the category. And we can learn some things statistically. For example, it looks like the most popular category of these popular YouTube channels is entertainment. We have 238 entertainment channels, which makes up nearly 1/4 of our data set. We might also notice in some of these plots at the top that for each one of these measures here, like subscriber number or video count, we have some individual channels that are much higher than all the other ones. So here we have that T series and subscriber numbers again. And we could even, because JMP has all these interactive graphics, go ahead and just select all of these subscribers and see where they are in all of these other measures. So we now have the most subscribed channels, and I can see that they really dominate the total number of video views. So that is, all these high video views channels tend to be the ones with the high subscribers, but that's not necessarily the same with the video count. So those little gray dots are channels that have a lot of videos that they've posted, but aren't necessarily among the most subscribed channels. In fact, I could look at this one right here and see that this is GMA News with 342,802 videos posted to their channel. I believe that this is a popular news channel in the Philippines, if I'm not mistaken. So it makes sense that they would have a lot of videos. They probably post videos for many, many news stories each week. So JMP performs, graphing, summarization, statistical analyses. We're going to keep it pretty basic here because we're assuming that for many of us, we might be starting out with statistics for the very first time. But as we go along, I do want you to just keep in mind that JMP has a really wide range of capabilities, of ways of analyzing data. So if we just take a look at our Analyze menu here, you're going to notice things for basic statistics. That tool we were just using is one we'll see a little more in a moment. It's called the distribution tool, or I'll use the word platform, which just describes one of these analysis tools that you find under the menus here. But it has a lot more as well. So if you're familiar with linear regression, there's general purpose linear regression tools, from your simple regression to multiple regression, generalized regression, things of that nature. Suite of machine learning capabilities, many of which in this case are available in JMP Pro. your university might license Jump Pro, but if you're using standard Jump, you'll actually notice that some of the things that we might see in these menus actually aren't going to be present there. But to highlight a couple other things, Jump has tools for mining free text data, or that is unstructured text, things like product review narratives, for example. We have techniques for what we call multivariate statistics, so analyzing many variables at the same time. So some of you may have heard of things like principal components analysis or factor analysis or structural equation modeling. We have a lot of usage in engineering statistics, and there's an entire suite of tools relevant to that domain. And then looking up at these top menus, we have a lot of other collections of tools as well. For example, designing experiments, a lot of different graphing tools, and even tools for preparing data for analysis. For example, combining data from multiple data tables, or working with the different rows in your data table to figure out exactly how they should be analyzed and so forth. So Jump really is, it's a pretty wide tool, and we're just going to see a small bit of it today because the goal right now isn't necessarily to teach you how to use the exact Jump tools that you're going to be using in your course. I'm sure you'll cover that as you go along. It's to help you understand really at a very basic or fundamental level how Jump works, so that regardless of the tools you're trying to use, you have enough knowledge to get started. So before we go on to talk about the Jump interface and making graphs, performing analyses, and so forth, let's talk just for a couple more minutes in slightly more detail about exactly what Jump is. So this is desktop data analysis software, so it's not running in the cloud or on a server, though there are options. Maybe your university could deploy it that way. It's primarily desktop software, so you can download it and install it directly on your own desktop or laptop computer, and it runs both Windows and Mac. And as I mentioned before, there's standard Jump and Jump Pro. So what we're looking at right now is the latest version of Jump Pro. That's version 17. For you to get Jump, your university might have a license for it already. Many universities do. If your university doesn't, you can go to a website called On the Hub. It's onthehub.com, and get what we call the student subscription of Jump, where you pay a small price to license Jump for 12 months. And your university or your instructor for your course may have you access it that way. Best bet, if you're not sure how to get Jump, is to just ask the instructor for your course what the best way to get Jump is. Now, Jump is used widely across many different universities, but it's also used in a wide range of industries as well. So just know that Jump is a tool that you can actually make good use of once you're out of university and working. So here's a page from our website that just summarizes some of the more prominent Jump users out there and how they use Jump. So if I scroll down, you might notice some pretty prominent companies. For example, here's one that's kind of fun. We have at Nike, so the athletic apparel manufacturer, they use Jump in their Nike Air Manufacturing Innovation Department to actually help design some of those Nike Air shoe technologies. Or even right here, you can see P&G, that stands for Procter & Gamble, which if you haven't heard of them, you probably have one of their products in your house. They make a huge number and breadth of types of consumer goods. Or taking a look at another one, here we have a story from a company called Regeneron, which if you were following some of the pharmaceutical news and treatment news during the COVID-19 pandemic, you probably came across their name as well. So there's just a really large number of even some of the world's most technologically advanced and successful companies that use Jump. So this isn't just a teaching tool. It's not just something for school. It's something that's actually used quite extensively out there in the real world. And even though you have some really sophisticated, scientists and researchers and engineers who use Jump, it is designed to be easy to use. As you saw, just for me making some of those graphs and performing some analyses, it's no more than a couple clicks. So Jump it's easy to use. It's no coding, so you don't have to write one line of code if you don't want to. And it's full of a lot of interactive graphics to try to help you explore and understand your data better. So it's a powerful tool, used a lot in the real world, but it's also particularly helpful and easy to use when you're first getting started. And so With that said, let's actually take a deeper look at JMP and how it works to help you figure out how to use it best in your course. We're going to start by talking briefly about the JMP interface. So looking right here, we have the JMP data table. And this is where you're going to start for probably most or maybe all of the things you do in your course. So you may be looking at this, and if you've used something like, let's say, Microsoft Excel or Mac Numbers, thinking, oh, it looks kind of similar to a spreadsheet. And I want to highlight that it's actually different from a spreadsheet in one really key sense. And that is that there's a particular structure to it. Each row in a data table corresponds to one observation, in this case, one YouTube channel that we've observed here. And each column stands for one variable or measurement. So this one is just the name of the channel. This is the number of subscribers and so forth. Something like a spreadsheet, you can enter any information anywhere you want. A particular column in your spreadsheet can be a mix of different types of values, some of which are raw data, some are summary statistics, some are a graph. And in JMP and really all proper statistics software, that's not the way it works. We have this one row per observation structure and one column per variable so that the software knows exactly what to do with all of the data. So for example, let's take this subscriber number. You can see at the top here, we have 234. Now in Excel, I could type anything I wanted into here. Let's just type, I'm going to type a word in there, text. And you'll notice if I try to do that, JMP actually says, hey, thought there were subscriber numbers in here. And so putting characters or text in there doesn't make sense. Are you sure you want to do that? Now, this is just one example of how you need to kind of obey this one column per variable structure here. So I'm going to click revert to actually undo what I just did. Now, what I just did actually highlights another very important thing to know about the JMP interface. And that is that each column has what's called a modeling type associated with it. And really that's just telling JMP what kind of data live in that column. So JMP knows what to do with it. And they're best captured by these icons that you see in the notes on the left, and then that I've put a box around right here. So we have at the basic level, we have this blue triangle and red and green bars. Let's stick with subscriber number here. You'll notice that that has a blue triangle. And if I click on it, you can see what's selected is continuous. And this is telling JMP, well, this is a continuous type of measurement or variable. That is, it's numbers, and you can do things like find the average of these numbers. If we go to, let's say, category, you'll notice that it's red bars, and that stands for a nominal variable, where a nominal variable is just groupings or categories that don't have any natural ordering to them. So that makes sense here: music, entertainment, gaming, people and blogs, and so forth. And the types of analyses and graphs you would do with a nominal variable are different than with a continuous variable. And this is how we tell JMP which type of variable it is, so JMP knows what kinds of graphs to make and what kinds of analyses to perform. So when you first bring your data into JMP, you want to make sure that the modeling types are set correctly so that JMP actually behaves the way that you want it to behave. So let's say that we have our data here. And of course, there's more, as you can probably tell just from looking at it, more to the data table than what I've just talked about. But this is really at a fundamental level what you need to know to get started. So let's say I have some data. Now I want to do something with it, make a graph, perform an analysis. What you do first is go to these menu items at the top. So if I want to analyze the data, I would go to the Analyze menu. If I want to make a graph, I would go to the Graph menu. If I want to actually manipulate the data table, maybe I want to filter it, or I want to combine multiple data tables into one, I would go to the Tables menu. If I wanted to, let's say, work with the columns in my data table, for example, I want to change things about the data types that are in there, or how many decimal places should be displayed, all kinds of options under the Columns menu, and so forth. So you always begin at the top here in one of these menus, and then once you get into a tool, let's just take a quick look here at a tool we'll see a little bit more of in a moment. And let's say I'm analyzing a particular variable. You will get some kind of default output, but know that when you get these kinds of outputs, it's not all that JMP can do. You'll notice these little red triangle menus everywhere. So you'll see one here and here. Some of them even live back in the data table. Here's one over here, here's one over here, and over here. These red triangles are all over JMP, and they are menus that actually contain most of JMP's features or capabilities. So for example, if I click here, here are a number of different graphing and analysis options for working with this category variable that I have. And so when you're doing things in JMP, you start with your data table, you choose a particular tool from one of these menus, and then once you get into that tool, you can ask that tool to perform additional actions for you using the red triangle options. And that's the basic idea in kind of navigating at a really fundamental level here, the JMP interface. So now let's actually use that interface to do at least at an introductory level, the basic things that you would do in one of your statistics courses. And we're going to start with making graphs. And to do that, we're going to go back to the very first tool that we opened up in JMP, and that's called Graph Builder. So let's go back to that graph that I made before very quickly and actually slow down and see how I did it so that we understand how this Graph Builder tool works, because no matter what domain you're in, you will have use for this tool. So Graph Builder lives at the top of the graph menu. And when I open it, you'll notice right in the middle, I just have this big blank area that says drag variables into drop zones. So variables, that refers to this list of columns in our data table over here. And the drop zones are all of these things that are lighting up blue as I start to drag one of these variables. So when we started out, I said, let's take a look at the sum total subscriber numbers across the different categories of YouTube channels. So if I wanted to look at subscriber number by category, I can start with either variable. Let's start with the subscriber number this time and start to drag it. And maybe I know that I want that on the y-axis of my graph. So I'm going to drag it over to the y-axis. And you can see that before I even release it, JMP starts making a graph for me. So I'm going to go ahead and let go. Now, because subscribers is a continuous variable, JMP started by making a simple dot plot. So we just have one dot here for each channel. Here again is that T series. Down here, we actually have Cocomelon, which if any of you spend any time around very, very young children, maybe you've heard of that before. You can see that I didn't have to tell JMP right off the bat what graph to make. It basically takes a best guess at the type of graph as soon as it receives some kind of information. In this case, it guessed a dot plot is the best way to graph these data if all I provided was this one continuous variable. But you can change the default graph that's produced by using a number of different options. The first are the graph elements, which are depicted there in the notes, but if we take a look up here, you'll find them as a ribbon of options at the top. You'll notice there's just one selected, and it's the dot element right here. In fact, if I turn that off, we just end up with a blank graph. So I could choose a different type of graph. For example, I could choose a histogram, or I could choose a box plot. There are a number of different graphs I might make when I have just one continuous variable. Now let's actually add categories we did before. We wanted to look at these subscriber numbers across category. So in this case, I'm going to drag it to the x-axis, and you can see JMP said, okay, well, you gave me a nominal variable on the x-axis. I have that continuous variable on the y. What I'm going to do is have a separate group of dots for each category. So it's just a dot plot by this categorical variable. And what I did before was, instead of looking at these dots, I decided I wanted to look at the bars. So now we have bars representing the subscriber number. And actually, if I remember correctly, I took this category variable, and in addition to putting it in the X role or the X drop zone, I also dragged it over to this color role so that each bar would have a different color to help us visually distinguish them a little better. So I'm pretty close to the graph we did before, but what we have here is a graph of the mean number of subscribers, or the average per category. And I can actually notice that by looking at something called the element properties. So an element, again, is just the thing that I put in the graph. In this case, it's the bars. And here, it's telling me which statistic is being plotted. in this case, the mean. If I wanted to look at the sum, what I could do is click on summary statistic and then just choose the statistic that I want the bar to represent. And we can see that now all the numbers have gotten quite a bit bigger. I mean, we're up to 5 billion sum total subscribers, and the pattern has changed quite a bit. So here, if we go back to the mean, you can see it's, relatively even, the mean number of subscribers per channel, but because we have more entertainment and music channels than we have other channels, when we add up the sum total of subscribers, those two types of channels really dominate. So with a graph builder here, I've made a graph first by dragging and dropping a couple variables into the drop zone. Jump guessed the best graph to make, but I'm not stuck with that graph. I used the graph elements and the element properties in order to create the graph that I want. Now, you may have even further things you want to do to your graph, and you can't figure out, well, how do I get a combination of an element and the element properties to do what I want? Odds are you can find what you're trying to do just by right-clicking on the part of the graph you want to change. For example, I'm not a big fan of this very light blue color for music. So if I wanted to change that, I might just right-click directly on music in the legend here and find a fill color option where I'll change it to, let's say, purple. Or if I wanted to change some aspect of the axis here, I might right-click and find the axis settings where I can specify, for example, grid lines or the minimum maximum value of the axes and so forth. And eventually when I'm all done, I can just click done, and now I have my graph. Now that seemed like probably a lot, right? I was talking for several minutes while I made this graph, but again, Graph Builder is pretty simple. So if we were to just start from scratch here, it's not a whole lot to make that graph. Again, I just put category on the X, subscriber on the Y, color by category, and select the bars, and I'm basically there. Again, the last thing we just did was, in fact, change to the sum. Now, what's really nice is Graph Builder is great for just exploratory graphing, and you can kind of just drag things around all over to see how different things change and how the graph starts to maybe tell a story. So let's say I'm going to start over here. I'll put subscriber here, but instead I'm going to go now to maybe video count on the X. And I get a scatter plot here. So now let's say I want to look at this by category. Well, what should I do? Well, I can just start dragging category to different places to see when I might actually get a graph that looks sensible to me. And if I end up, let's say over here on wrap, it looks like, well, now I can get a scatter plot of this for each individual category. And if I ever make a mistake, I can just click undo. So when you're in Graph Builder, and it's always good to have a good look at your data using some graphs, don't be afraid to just drag and drop different variables in different drop zones until you find a graph that seems to tell the story that you want. You're not going to make any irreversible mistakes or anything like that. So that's a little bit about Graph Builder. I think probably the most generally applicable tool in all of JMP. Now let's talk about performing analyses. Actually, now that I'm looking at the clock, though, I'm going to go ahead and pause here, Kevin, to see, now that we're at about the midway point, if we have any outstanding questions that we could answer right now.
I'm going through them, so I think I'm keeping up with them, but I'll let you know if I can't answer them all, but I'm typing in some answers as you speak.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, Kevin, and thanks, everybody. I guess we will carry on here and talk about performing analyses. Now, again, I just want to stress here, the goal isn't to show you the actual statistical analysis tools that you're going to need to use in your course. That really depends on exactly what kind of statistics course you're taking. It's to give you an idea of just how performing analyses works in JMP so that you can get started with whichever tool it is you're actually using. Oh,
Ross, sorry to interrupt. A question did came up that would be better for you to actually demonstrate than me to type an answer. So going back to any of those graphs, if you wanted to omit a category, when you want to hide and exclude some rows for a graph, can you show how to do that?
Sure, let's see. Okay, so here's a graph that I'd saved. I'll show you how to save and recall graphs and analyses a little bit later. But here's a box plots of each of the category subscriber numbers. And so I think the question is, well, let's say we just wanted to exclude one of these categories. What would we do? Well, I'm going to go to the red triangle and show you a tool that's all over JMP. So in all of the graphing and analysis tools, if you go to the red triangle and look near the bottom, you're going to find something called the local data filter. And what this is going to allow me to do is specify essentially what subset of my data I actually want included in the plot. So I'm going to select category here and click plus to add a filter by category. And now let's say I just wanted to look at entertainment, music, gaming, and people and blogs. I can select them, and now those are the only ones that are included. All the other ones are excluded. And so this local data filter tool lives all over JMP in all kinds of different graphing and analysis tools, and you'll always find it under the red triangle in this bottom section. Here now says remove, since I had already added one, so I can remove it and get back to normal. All right. Thank you, Eduardo, for that question. And thanks, Kevin, for catching it. So as I mentioned, let's talk just a little bit about how you perform analyses in JMP. You'll start when you want to actually perform a statistical analysis of some kind by going to the Analyze menu. I think we kind of mentioned that before. We have these basic menu categories at the top and then all these individual tools that live under them. Let's say that I wanted to get a basic summary table. If you remember before, when we made the graph of the sum total subscriber numbers by category, we also made a little table that provided us the numerical values for those subscriber numbers as well. And to do that, we used a tool called Tabulate. So I'm going to pop Tabulate open right now. This is a tool for creating summary tables. You may also hear these referred to sometimes as pivot tables or crosstabs or cross tabulations. This tool works very much like Graph Builder in that it's drag and drop. So I can grab category and drag it, say, into the drop zone for rows, and immediately JMP starts making a summary table. In this case, it just says the number of rows in my data table for each category. So I can see that entertainment is actually the most well represented at 238. Popular channels, music is next at 217, and so forth. If I wanted to look at subscriber numbers, I could grab that and just drop it right over the data that's currently in the table. And now it's given me the sum total subscriber number for each one of these. Now you'll also notice here a lot of different statistics that I can use to actually summarize these data. So for example, the mean or average, the standard deviation, the minimum, the maximum, and so forth. So if I wanted the mean instead of the sum, I could take the mean and just replace the sum with it. Or if I undo that, maybe I want the mean and the sum. I could take the mean and just put it, if you notice that little blue drop zone right next to sum, and now I have the sum and the mean. Likewise, I could add other variables like video views and video count. And I could either replace subscriber number, or let me just put it just to the right of subscriber number. And now I have the sum total for all three of these variables. Maybe I'll switch it to the mean instead. So this tabulate function, or this tabulate platform, is the place to go when you want to perform just these quick numerical summaries, no matter what different statistic it is you want to use to actually summarize your data. Now, in addition to performing these basic, graphical summaries with Graph Builder, or graphical exploration, I should say, and some of these tabular summaries, there's an analysis tool that will serve you in every domain you could possibly be in, but also just as a great example of, again, how analysis works in general in JMP. And that's the distribution platform, which is your one platform for summarizing and analyzing single variables, or just one variable at a time. Or if you're familiar with this term, univariate statistics, where uni just means one and variate means variable. This is the tool that lives at the top of the Analyze menu. And now here, for the first time, we're really taking a look at a JMP analysis launch window. So what this is a list of all of our variables or columns on the left, and then the different roles in the analysis that they might play on the right. This is a simple one. We just analyze each variable independently. So let's take just a couple variables here. And I'm going to click Y, columns, and click OK. Note that if you wanted help at this point, you could click this help button down here, and it would actually launch some help that'll help you figure out how to use this tool. And JMP immediately produces an output for each variable. So on the left with subscribers, a continuous variable, we get a histogram with a box plot. And down below, we have quantiles and summary statistics. And on the right, we have for our categorical variable or nominal variable category, we have the counts and the proportions or labeled probabilities here of each one along with the bar chart. And these, as we mentioned before, are interactive. So for example, if I highlight the high subscriber numbers, I can start seeing, for example, which categories we typically observe them in. Now, there might be additional things I want to do with these particular variables. So taking subscriber number, maybe a common thing that we do is assess the distribution or the shape of the distribution of a variable. So if I'm thinking that's what I want to do, I should go to the red triangle right next to that variable, and then I'll find the appropriate analysis option. For example, if I want to fit a distribution to these variable or to this variable, I can choose one here. So I'll choose to fit, let's say, a normal distribution. And I get some summary statistics down below. And then up top, I actually get a visual depiction of that normal distribution that I just fit. Now, I did that kind of, just to demonstrate. Obviously, here, it looks like a normal distribution is not a particularly great fit. This standard bell curve is not a good representation of these data. The data actually look a little more like this. But that's just to show you that, again, when you're inside a JMP tool, if you want to perform an additional analysis, just head to the red triangle and select it from the list here. Let's take a look at one more example of this. Now let's actually look at analyzing pairs of variables. So let's say the relationship between category and subscriber number. We're going to use the tool that lives right below the distribution platform, the Analyze menu. It's called Fit Y by X. And the name is meant to imply that you have one X variable and one Y variable, and you just want to know the relationship between them. So let's say that category is my X variable, subscriber number is my Y variable. This tool can take any combination of nominal, ordinal, and continuous variables as X and Y, and it will automatically know which analyses are appropriate. Again, this is highlighting the importance of getting those modeling types indicated by those little colored icons, getting those modeling types correct when you first bring your data in. So when I click OK, JMP in this case first just gives me a dot plot. This is kind of looking similar to what we were doing in Graph Builder at the start. But if I want to, let's say, compare these groups to see if some have higher or lower subscriber numbers, I would go to the red triangle. In this case, the analysis I might want to perform is called an ANOVA, an analysis of variance. And so I can select that from the list to perform that analysis and get the statistical outputs below. If you're familiar with hypothesis testing, you might notice this p-value right here is less than a typical one of 0.05. We might say that we have evidence that at least one of these YouTube channel categories is different from at least one other one. But again, the statistical analysis is not really the point here. It's again just highlighting in a different tool now that you specify at the outset which variables you want to analyze and what role they should play, and then you go to these red triangles to select the actual analyses that you want to do. And now you're probably wondering, okay, well, what is it going to look like in some of the analyses I need to perform? When we cover finding help at the very end, I'm going to show you where you can find video demonstrations, much like the very brief ones I just did for the specific analyses that you need to do.
Hey, Ross, I'm just sorry to interrupt. I know you mentioned this at the end and show people the location of where this recording will be, but there's two people that need to leave early. And so we're asking if you could just share that link now of where it's going to be.
Sure, we can do that right now. Let's find out. I actually meant to have this on my clipboard and I forgot. So excuse me while I find our way to it. Well, here, I'll actually just show you the easier way. That'll bring you to a recording for this when it's posted, as well as a lot of other ones. So if I Google JMP Academic Webinar Library, the first hit will be all of the recordings of the webinars that we do. Now, some are aimed towards teachers, that is, your instructors might come here to learn about how to use JMP from the teaching perspective, and also some advanced research topics, but this one will be posted alongside there. Let me grab this And I'm going to drop this link into the chat here. And so later this week, we will post the recording of this webinar to this page. And you will also find, once you click through to it, some helpful links like to the quick guides that I mentioned and will be showing shortly here, as well as this JMP journal so that you can actually reproduce some of the things that we did. Okay, so we've seen how to make graphs and perform analyses. I think we know the basics of the JMP interface. Let's talk about getting our data into JMP. Now, the easiest way would be if you end up with native JMP files, that is .jmp files, in which case you just double click them. For example, let me just close that down and I'm going to open this folder here. And here is a .jmp file that is for our YouTube channels. And when I double click it, JMP just opens it automatically. And if you're using it exclusively for classroom purposes, there's a decent chance that your instructor or the textbook that you're using will provide .jmp files, and that's all you have to do. But maybe not. A lot of data comes from a lot of different sources in a lot of different formats. Know that JMP can open a lot of other file types directly as well, just by going to File, Open. For example, I have here a .csv file. This stands for comma separated values. It's just a text file where each row is on a line and each value is separated by a comma. It looks kind of like this. So JMP can read this very common file type. We just go File, Open, select the CSV file. And when I click Open, you can see JMP launches this tool to help me import the data. And that's because maybe it's the case that there are column headers in the data in that CSV file, but maybe there aren't. Maybe I only want to grab some of the columns of data and not all of them. Maybe I just want to see a preview to even know what's in there and how JMP would bring it in, which is what I have at the top here. So JMP provides these tools, import wizards, we call them, to help you bring your data in from a number of different file types. Now, I'm not going to get into the specifics of how to use this particular import wizard. The idea is just to show you that you can point to a non-JMP file and get a tool that helps you bring it in. And so once I import the data, here we are ready to go. Now you may get your data as Excel files. So here we have our Excel file that contains these data. Now we could, of course, go to File, Open, point to the Excel file. And now we have another import wizard, this one built specifically to handle Excel files that we could use to bring the data in. Another easy way, if you have a spreadsheet that has your data and it's in this nice format, already one row per observation, one column per variable, and maybe you even have column headers at the top, you can always just copy paste. So let me copy these data. And then go to File, New Data Table, and that's just going to be a blank JMP data table. And then under Edit, I can paste the data in, or because I had column names that are copied as well, I can select Paste with column names, so JMP knows to take the first row from that Excel sheet and call it the column headers or column labels here. And again, I'm in. And now what I would want to do here is actually clean my data up a little bit to get it ready for analysis. We said get those modeling types right, and they look pretty good. Rank, I might actually want to call an ordinal variable instead of a nominal, so I'll change that. There may be some other things I want to clean up. For example, right here at number 2, we have YouTube movies claiming a video count of 0. In fact, I see a few with 0 video counts. So I'm not sure how that got in there, but I don't think I want to analyze it because I don't think it's a accurate reflection of a real channel. And so I might, let's say, select all of the zeros and then find a red triangle, in this case by my rows, and say, hey, why don't you just delete all those rows? Or you might notice I have a lot of different categories, more than we started with initially. For example, I have pets and animals, I have nonprofits and activism, and some of them, they really only have a few channels associated with them. So I might right click here and actually recode this variable. Let's take auto and vehicles and some of these other smaller categories, and let's just combine all of them together and call them other. Now I'll click recode. And now I have a cleaned up version that I've called just category 2 here, where I've collapsed a lot of these together. That's just a couple quick examples of how you can clean up your data, get it ready for analysis in JMP if it's not already clean for you. Now, for classroom use, it probably will be pretty clean most of the time, but especially if you go out there for a project or just to find some data online to analyze, you may need to do some data cleanup up front. And in the learning materials we're going to look at, you'll see a variety of materials to help you actually learn how to do that. But it's a little bit beyond the scope of what I intend to cover in detail here. So I'm going to close that table down and bring our original one back and talk about saving and sharing results. Okay, so here's our data table before. So let's say that I am working on a graph. Let's see, I'm going to, just for fun, let's make a new one here. Let's take a look. In this case, I'm going to go category by subscriber, and maybe I'll also, just to show some flexibility of Graph Builder, I'm going to have several different Y variables like video views and video count. Let's actually, we'll still color by category. All right, so on the X, I have category, and then I have basically a separate pane in my plot for each of these 3 continuous variables. So now let's say I want to save this. I may need to come back to this graph later. Your instinct might be to go to File, Save. It can, and it'll save a .jrp file, and that'll be linked to your data table. And when you try to open this .jrp file, it's going to ask you to point to the data, or maybe you can actually just embed the data in that JRP file. I recommend something else. Instead, under the red triangle, and here, let me pull up the notes so that we can map to that. All over JMP, you're going to find this category in the red triangle. It says Save Script, and I'm going to choose to save it to my data table. And now I'm going to call it test, capital T-E-S-T, just so we can keep track of it. And then keep your eyes up here in the background in our data table while I click OK. You'll notice that that script that says test has been added to the data table. Underlyingly, this is the code, the JMP scripting language, or JSL code, that actually creates this graph. And so when I click this green arrow next to it, it creates the graph again for me. And now what's really nice about this is that it actually reruns the graph on the data table in real time, so that if you update the data, it will be reflected in the graph. For example, let's just say, let's say I've just take out all the entertainment entries here. So I've selected them in this little header graph. I'm going to right click and go to hide and exclude, which basically tells JMP, hey, don't show these rows to me in any graphs and don't include them in any analyses. So when I rerun this, we shouldn't see the entertainment category anymore. And we don't. If you go through this quick list here, you'll notice that entertainment is not present. So this is a great way to just have reproducible graphs and analyses all bundled inside your data table. So you have one file with everything you're working on. And again, that's going to save script, save to data table. Now, there are some other options. For example, if you want to get this graph into a document or slides, you can use a simple copy paste. To copy something, go to the JMP tools. There's just this toolbar at the top of your JMP window, or you can actually click the tools right here and go to the selection tool. It's this plus sign looking thing. Select everything you want, right click and go to copy. And then let's bring up a Word document, let's say. So maybe I'm doing a report for class, and I want this to go in my report. I'm going to, instead of going to paste, I'm going to go to an option that's known as paste special. And that lets me choose the format that I'm going to paste in. On Mac, PDF is a good format. On Windows, you'll see something called EMF. It stands for Enhanced Meta File, and that'll be a good option for you on Windows. And so now I have this copied into my document. And the nice thing about using PDF or EMF is that you can resize it without ever losing quality, so things don't get blurry or pixelated. So as you can see, as I zoom in all the way, it got pixelated at first, but then the graph was essentially redrawn. And that's a benefit of some of these particular image types like PDF and EMF is that they can just be redrawn however big they need to be on your screen or on your sheet of paper. So I've gotten this into a document. I could do the same for slides. I may also just want to get a standalone file, like an image file, like a JPEG or something. You can always, from a graph or an analysis, just go to File, Export, meaning save it as something other than a JMP file. And then I could select image and maybe the type of image that I want to save it as and so forth. For the sake of time, I won't do that, but just know that you can. So these are the, I think for, at least for purposes of classroom use, the three main ways you'll want to save your work: either saving scripts back to your data table to be able to reproduce what you did, copying, pasting into your slides or your documents, or if you need a standalone file, going to File, Export. Now, with the little bit of time we have left, I want to shift gears from focusing on using JMP for data analysis and graphing to learning with JMP and learning about JMP. First, you may notice, actually, I'm just going to close this down so that we can maintain our focus on what we're going to talk about. You may notice that I have a menu item called Student. If you download the student subscription of JMP, you'll have this installed automatically. And you'll notice there are a number of different options, and we're going to talk about those in just a second. But first, know that if you don't have this student menu, maybe because your university licenses JMP and you download it from your university software portal, you can always add it to your version of JMP. So when you go to the recording and get this JMP file here, this journal with these notes, you'll have a link to where I'm about to go, and I'll also show you how to find it otherwise. But it is a JMP add-in, as we call them, that will add the student menu to your version of JMP. So you would go to this page and you would click this button right here to download this .jmp add-in file, and then double click it, and it will put this student menu in your version of JMP. And if you just need to find this maybe via Google, I'm just going to type JMP student add-in, and it's the very first hit that you'll find here. Now, just know if you go this route, this add-in is available only in English. I presume if you're here and following us along, then your English is probably quite good and you will have no problem using the add-in. But I do know that we have people from around the world joining us here today, so I just wanted to make sure and point that out. So let's see what's actually in the student menu. And what it is, it's a collection of calculators and teaching and learning demonstrations that are particularly helpful for student use. Let's say, for example, I'm doing some exercises at the end of a chapter in my book, and they ask you to do some calculations, and oftentimes they don't provide you with raw data. They provide you with some summary statistics and ask you to calculate a confidence interval. And so here we have a calculator that will allow me to do that, either from a raw data table or, let's say, summary statistics. So maybe they tell me to calculate a confidence interval when the mean was 100, the standard deviation was 15, and we measured 40 individuals. And so right here with that information, without ever having the raw data, I've calculated the confidence interval for us, which is listed here and then depicted in the graph below. So there's a wide variety of these calculators in the student menu that are particularly useful for those situations when you're performing calculations using summary statistics. Now, under the applets, you're going to find a number of very helpful things that will allow you to explore statistical concepts in an interactive way while you are learning. Let's say that I'm learning linear regression. So I'm going to go to this demonstrate regression. Now, this is a tool that will allow us to see kind of how various aspects of the data affect a linear regression line. So by a linear regression line, I mean just this best fitting line through this cloud of points. For example, I could grab one of these points here, say, okay, I'm trying to understand how the value of an individual point actually affects the slope of this line. And I can do that interactively in this tool just by clicking and dragging. And I can see that the line moves quite a bit. Maybe I want to see, well, what happens though if the sample size is a lot bigger? Let's say now instead of 25, it's 100. Well, I can see that moving a point around like that doesn't move the line nearly as much. So the influence of one point starts to become diminished the more and more points that we have. Now, that's not something I'm necessarily trying to teach right now. It's just showing you how you can use some of these interactive tools to help maybe test and build your own intuitive understandings of how different data analysis techniques work. So if we look under the applets, we have a number of different applets for things like sampling distributions or confidence intervals or hypothesis tests, these core statistical techniques that I think at some point we all learn when we're learning statistics at the outset here. So finally, with just the few minutes we have left, let's answer possibly the most pressing question at this point, which is going forward when you need help trying to figure out how to get JMP to do what you need to do, what should you do? So let me bring our data back. Let's talk about different ways of getting help. First thing, you might, let's say you want to do an ANOVA. That's before when we looked at the different categories and compared their subscriber numbers, and you don't know where in JMP to go. Know that under the help menu, you can search JMP for the tool that you need. So if I go to search JMP, I get this little search dialog and I can type ANOVA into it. And this first hit tells me exactly where to go. It says location, analyze, fit Y by X. Then it has this little symbol, which basically means, hey, there's an extra note you should read in this step, and says click go to launch. And then you'll find it under the one-way option that's called means in ANOVA. And if I want to launch that tool, I can just click go to get started. And then I follow that path that it just specified, which again, it said go to means ANOVA, and there we go. So use that help search JMP if you're not sure where in JMP to go to perform the analysis that you need. Now, once you're in an analysis, let's say we're looking at the distribution of subscriber numbers, and you're wondering, I could use some more information on one of the things I'm looking at, like let's say that box plot at the top. There's a tool in JMP, it's called the help tool. It's a little question mark here where you can click directly on something in a JMP window, like a JMP analysis report, and get help on that thing. You can see this took me right to the page for the outlier box plot with these bullet points that tell me all the different ways of interpreting the individual components, and this nice graph at the top with the labeling to tell me what the different components of that are. So when you're in JMP and you want to just get right to the right page of help that you need, the most direct route is to, again, choose that help tool shaped like a question mark and then just click directly on the thing you want help with. So those are a couple of the tools that you're going to find under the help menu, or ways of getting into the help menu in the case of the help tool. Basically just tools built into JMP to give you help. But let's talk about some online resources now. First, as I have mentioned multiple times, we have a collection of quick tutorials that show you how to do things in JMP. And once you're actually performing specific analyses for your course, I highly recommend checking these out. And it's called, this collection is called our JMP Learning Library. And if I pull up a browser window, I'll take us to it. You can see in the notes right there, it says it's at jmp.com/learn. This is a collection of approximately 100 entries for doing things in JMP. For example, just opening JMP for the first time, getting started with it, or making box plots, or assessing the normality of a distribution. Just all these different quick things you might want to know how to do in JMP. Let's say I want to make a box plot and I don't know how. So I would click on box plots. I get a quick tutorial video here. That's, in this case, it's 1 minute and 41 seconds long. And it shows us a number of different ways of actually making box plots in JMP, just walking us through step by step. And if I click View Guide, it gives me a 1-page PDF that I can keep for reference. So if I'm making box plots later, I can just consult the steps. So this learning library has, again, about 100, I think just over 100 entries for all different kinds of things, from basic to more advanced things that you might need to do in JMP. This is the place to go if you're wondering, well, how do I do X? Go to jmp.com/learn. Note that we're currently rolling out some updates to our worldwide site. So the most up-to-date version is the English site at en_US. You can also click on worldwide sites to go to the US site if you are in another geography. And when you do, you can always just then search for Learning Library in the little search box right next door, and then find it that way as well. Now, finally, if you're wondering about statistical concepts that you're learning, so apart from JMP itself and just want another explanation of something like correlation or regression, I recommend our statistics knowledge portal. So if I go to jump.com/SKP, or skip as we like to call it, it will take us to a collection of pages that provide professionally written high quality explanations of basic statistical concepts. For example, I'll select correlation on the right, and we have a relatively brief, easy to digest explanation of what a correlation is and how to visualize it effectively. So you can see we have coverage of some of the core statistical concepts and techniques that are covered in most, introductory statistics courses across a number of different domains. So if you want another explanation of the stats concept, I highly recommend, again, going to jump.com/SKP or skip. So that's a little bit about finding help. And that's where we're going to wrap it up here now that we've just hit the top of the hour. I do hope that in this past hour, for those of you who've never used JMP before, which was, I think, a pretty strong majority of us, that you feel comfortable now, both using JMP, at least opening a data set from your course and getting started, and know a little bit about where to find help when you need it.